Good evening. This video is going to look at the differences between the Fujifilm XPRO2 and the Fujifilm XT2. Now, I'm not going to get into a great deal of specs in this video. There's lots of videos out on YouTube that will allow you to see that. Rather, I'd like to show you how I use each camera differently as a photographer. The XPRO2 was my first Fujifilm camera. I bought that along with a 35mm lens probably about 3.5 years ago. At the time I was using a Canon 5D Mark II, and that was my main camera. I bought the Fuji just because it looked cool. I wanted to try out mirrorless. I liked the EVF, and I thought that I would use it primarily for street photography. It would be my discrete camera. On top of that, with my Canon, I had probably 5 or 6 fairly expensive lenses. So I had never thought that I would drop the Canon line completely and pick up an XT2. So I ended up selling my Canon gear. I picked up the XT2 and a variety of Fuji lenses. So when do I pick up the XT2 and when do I pick up the XPRO2? So let's start with the XT2. The big difference for me is it feels better when I pick it up. The grip is a little bit larger, and I find that it fits quite well with the smaller Fuji lenses. But the difference for me is when I had the XPRO2 originally and I started to buy some of the larger lenses like the 80mm, the 90mm, the 56mm, the 16mm, that the balance just wasn't right. With the XT2, the balance isn't right either. However, with the optional hand grip, it does make a big difference. So for any kind of event photography, landscape, or macro, I'll always reach for the XT2. So when it comes to street photography, I'll always reach for not the XPRO2, I'll always reach for the XT2. Now why is that? Boils down to one reason. It's the flip screen. I didn't use this flip screen at first, but I found, particularly if I'm using a 16mm lens with the XT2, that I'll want to get down closer to the ground. And I find that this flip screen is really quite helpful. So when do I use the XPRO2? From what I've described, you would think that it just sits in my closet. I use this as my fun camera. I will always have the 23mm sitting on it. And I'll also switch this off with a variety of vintage lenses. So for me, this lens kind of gives me that feel of, the 1960s, and I'll use some of these vintage lenses. I'll use this camera and those lenses when I don't have a purpose and I just want to go out and there's a bit of artistic creativity. So this one is used primarily for having fun. I must admit I don't use the optical viewfinder on this camera a great deal. I tend to stick to the electronic viewfinder unless I'm very close to a subject that is going to be walking into the frame. I don't have as much of a problem as some people have had with the ISO here. It's lifted up and you turn it. It's fairly easy to use. So I guess the question that sometimes I have in my mind is, when I upgrade next, am I going to upgrade the XT2 or the XPRO2? I don't think I'll be upgrading to the XT3 or the XPRO3. The XPRO3 sounds like it's going to be coming out shortly. I do like the addition of that flip screen. I think that that's something that, as I've mentioned earlier with the XT2, would probably drive me back to using the XPRO3 more for street photography. But I think for both series, I'm going to wait for the XT4 and the XPRO4 and see what they have to offer. If both them or one of them does have the in-body image stabilization, I think that would tip the balance for me in terms of upgrading. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, I'd appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button for the channel and hit the like button below. Thank you very much.